There is one topic that gets players talking in FF14, and that is job homogenization. I'm sure you know what it is, but just in case, here is a quick summary. Job homogenization is the idea that jobs are becoming increasingly similar to one another. An example of this would be how every single tank has a variation of a 30% damage reduction on a 2-minute CD. Now, obviously, this is a very touchy subject, especially in my community. I mean, you guys hate this stuff. And if I'm being honest, I also dislike it. But today, I really want to try and look at it from a different perspective. That's why we're going to be doing a pros and cons list for job homogenization. Because yes, there are certainly pros. Let's not be silly. The dev team is not out to get you. They're not out to kill your experience. They're just trying to make the best game possible. So, at least for this video, let's put job homogenization on an objective pedestal and really try to understand the logic behind it. The first and most obvious pro is balancing. It is infinitely easier to balance jobs when they are all designed in a fairly similar manner to one another. And yes, certain jobs will always be better than others, but other than a few hiccups in Endwalker, I feel balancing has been pretty solid. Not to mention, even when balancing is off, it's really only noticed by those week 1 or 2 raiders, like people who are trying to clear within a very limited time window. There isn't a single fight that is unclearable or even noticeably more difficult with a specific job, and that's a good thing. It lets raiders have a bit more freedom in their choice of job, and it discourages, for a lack of a better term, meta-minded players. Which does bring me to my second point. It's a lot easier to swap between jobs from a gameplay side of things when each job is fairly similar to one another. Let's once again look at tanks. With the exception of Paladin, all tanks are currently builder-spenders. Builder-spender gameplay typically revolves around good resource management, around burst windows to maximize damage. Not to mention gap closers, the aforementioned 3-minute mitigation CD, and the access to group shields and or magic mitigation. So it's pretty easy to go from playing, say, Dark Knight to Warrior, or Gunbreaker to Paladin. Yes, they all have their own quirks, but all you really have to learn is a new rotation. When it comes to mitigation, these same rules generally apply for each one. There's something like Brewmaster Monk that mitigates damage in a whole new way. The last pro that I can think of is it makes raid design a lot easier. You'd be surprised at how often one job or class with a wacky gimmick can completely break a fight. Here's a pretty recent example of this, although not the same game. Augmentation Evokers in World of Warcraft released and apparently broke the entire latest raid tier. I have no personal experience. I'm currently not sub to WoW, but still FF14's raids are designed so meticulously. Like, there is a very clear way that the dev team wants players to go through fights. There isn't a ton of room for creativity when it comes to solving mechanics, which is another topic I would love to do a pros and cons list for, because I have some feelings on that. But they're only able to achieve this kind of raid design with a very structured and uniform job design. We have to make sure everyone has a knockback resistance, some form of mitigation, and a 2-minute damage CD. But yes, the last pro is that raids are able to be designed around the way that jobs worked for a more tailored experience, making raid design a lot easier for the dev team, which I definitely see as a pro. But before we go on to the cons, I actually want to ask you a quick question. If you could just weigh the pros and cons of liking the video. I put a ton of time into this channel. Liking the video lets me know that I'm on the right track. Also, we may already have hit it, but we're very close to 1,000 subs, so thank you. It really does mean a lot. It's still weird to think, but hey, thank you. I'll take it. Also, thank you to our members, Axiaris and Brendan Tolentino. Your support means the world, helps make this possible. You're great. You're perfect. Now, back to the video. What are the cons of job homogenization? Because, oh boy, there are certainly cons. First and most obvious, it's boring. It makes jobs feel more stale. Rotations feel more static. If you play more than one job, it's just less fun. And to add to that, a lot of feedback I've seen within my own community is that the jobs themselves are less engaging. A less polite term would be dumbed down. A common complaint from healers is only having 3 to 4 buttons to press when not healing. I mean, with White Mage in particular, it's just keeping up your dot, casting Dia, and casting Blood Lily when it's up. So yes, con number 1 is that jobs feel stale. The second con is the loss of class identity. One term that gets thrown around is pruning. Essentially, when jobs feel similar or are homogenized, some players feel that the uniqueness of their choice is taken away. And that's something I could certainly sympathize with and understand. I've seen and heard plenty of recent examples like Samurai, Astrologian, and Summoner, where longtime players feel a bit left behind because of the changes made to bring their jobs more in line with the others. As a fairly newer player to the game, only being around for 2+ years, I don't have much to say. I get a lot of people bringing up changes made in Shadowbringers, but I haven't personally experienced that, so I'll leave this as con number 2 because I've just read so much about it, but I will leave any elaboration to you wonderful people in the comments. Again, I can only speak from my own experiences, so it would be nice to hear some testimonials from you in the comments. The last con I want to go over is the 2-minute burst window. The big change that every raider has felt with job homogenization is this push for every job to revolve around a 2-minute burst window. A lot of players do not like this. It makes working around boss quirks and general optimization feel a bit worse. I feel like 11 cut is a good example of this in P9S. At least for me, that mechanic comes up at such a weird time in my rotation as a Reaper. I essentially have to restart my whole rotation once the mechanic's over, but that's on top of a body check, so I'm scrambling to get into place for that, while also restarting my rotation where I'm supposed to have positionals in the opener. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. It's just off, man. Not to mention, if one player is off or dies or just isn't in sync, that can cause some damage. It makes some rated counters feel like a fight against the game itself. And at least with Reaper, there is a lot of times where I'm actively messing with my rotation in a worse way to fit around the burst window. It feels restrictive, limiting, and at least to a lot of players I've heard or seen talk about this, it's unpopular. This is perhaps the most important con, and the reason a lot of players look at homogenization as a net negative. Now that we've looked at all of the pros and cons, what is the key takeaway? Is job homogenization a net positive or a net negative? And I'm willing to bet a lot of you are going to say net negative, and I can't argue with that. But at the very least, let's not pretend that there aren't pros as well. I mean, job balance is a good thing. But in the grand scheme of things, just to take a step back, how many players do you think this really affects? Like, only raiders. Do you think like Roulette Randy is worried about his 2-minute burst window on his weekly kill of P12? No, the only group of players this really affects are the Savage and Ultimate Raiders. Some would argue the most passionate among the community. But that's just it. How many players do you really think fully engage with Savage and Ultimates? I mean, clear all 12 fights per expansion. And how many go through all the Ultimates? Among all of the FF14 player base, PS4, PS5, soon to be Xbox, PC, really just pause the video, take a second, think about it. At the end of the day, the main job of the dev team is to make sure the player count is high and that players are having fun. Square has access to a lot of data that I and no one else but Square has. All of that is to say, yes, keep voicing your opinions, but also realize that this game has a lot of players and a lot of moving parts to it. And if these changes are reflecting positively in the eyes of Square, don't expect much to change. But what do I know? Square could be looking into doing a complete and total 180 for Dawn Trail. Ultimately, the game is still fun. If anything, I see all of these comments, criticisms as passion. So keep it up. Whether or not you think job homogenization is good or bad, I still think it's a net negative personally. Please engage in the comments. I want to hear all of your feedback across all the expansions. The big question I have is, which expansion do you think had the best job design? I'm curious to know. I've heard a lot of talk about Stormblood having the best, but again, I can't speak for that, so debate in the comments. But before you do that, subscribe.